Good morning, everyone. My name is Janet Pinkley, and I'm one of the co-editors on the Community College book series. And Kayla, I'll let you introduce yourself.
I'm Kayla Casey, librarian at Ventura College and one of the editors of the series.
So today our presentation is going to feature authors from two of the chapters in the book series that was recently put out by ACRL. But Kayla and I wanted to take a minute just at the beginning of the presentation to talk about the series and why we decided to pursue this project. So I'm an institution, but I've been an adjunct. I've been for a very long time. And I really wanted to inform my practice and learn from librarians with a lot more experience in the community college setting. So I started turning to the library literature for this, especially while I was new at Ventura College and kind of figuring out the setting. But there just wasn't a lot of literature out there. And Kayla and I have worked together for about 15 years. And a few years ago, she joined me at Ventura College, but in a role as a tenure track librarian. And she started encountering similar results, that there just wasn't a lot of literature out there. And Kayla and I have been really fortunate across many years to work alongside creative community college colleagues in a lot of our professional interest groups. So we knew that there was dynamic work taking place in the community colleges. It just didn't seem to be reflected in the literature. And so we started to ponder why these librarian voices weren't heard from in the literature and why they weren't prevalent out there. And it just kind of planted the seed for what is now the Community College Library Book Series.
And so, like Janet said, we know that community colleges, they each serve their own unique student populations and offer programs that are reflective of their local community's needs. So because of this, we know that community college librarians have to be creative, innovative, and collaborative in all of the work that they do. So our goals in creating this series is to elevate their voices and inspire other community college librarians to reflect on their own work, start a new project or enhance an existing one, or even consider sharing their own work through publication so that we can all find more literature about all of the amazing work that community college librarians are doing.
And before we turn it over to our presenters, I just have to add, when we did our call for proposals for the first two books in the series, the global pandemic was not even a thing on the radar yet. It was not anticipated or even, I think, a possibility in anyone's mind. And the closures started taking place before the first draft of the chapters were due and before everyone's life got turned upside down. And the contributors for each of these books and the presenters you'll hear from today, they continued to work on their manuscripts amid all of this chaos and their lives becoming incredibly challenging in all different ways, which really reflected their determination and grit that we see out of community college professionals over and over again. And for me and Kayla, it was really inspiring to participate in this and such an honor to serve as editors in this book series. And, you know, the pandemic just amplified those feelings for us, I think.
And so the first two volumes in the series were just released, and they are reference and instruction and assessment. So in that same spirit of elevating community college librarian voices, our presentation today highlights a chapter from each volume demonstrating the great work taking place in community colleges across the country. Our first presentation is from Joy Ohlers, Joyce Takuda, and Erica Diaz from Kapi'olani Community College. They are the co-authors of From Standards to Framework, What Are Your Students Learning in the Community College Library Assessment? So I will turn it over to them.
All right, hi everyone. We're so glad to be here today from Kapi'olani Community College in Hawaii. I'm Joyce Tokuda, and with me is Joy Ohlers and Erica Diaz. And over the next 20 minutes, we'll be telling you about our journey transitioning from ACRL's information literacy competency standards for higher education to the framework for information literacy for higher education. And we have two parts. First, we'll tell you about our SLOs and how they have changed. And second, we'll show you 4 examples of how the framework changed our instruction and assessment. Okay, now these are our old student learning outcomes for library instruction at Kapi'olani Community College. And as you can see on the left, they were based on the information literacy competency standards. And at the library, we felt that out of the 5 standards, number 1 and number 4 were best handled by the course instructor as lead, and that number 2, 3, and 5 would be good for the library to actively teach and assess. And that led to the creation of 3 SLOs that students would be able to, number 1, find information, number 2, evaluate information, and number 3, cite information. Under each SLO, we had smaller objectives that we could measure. For example, SLO 1C, that students will be able to use Hawaii Voyager, that's our library catalog, to find books. And this led us to assess student work in a somewhat simplistic fashion. For example, this is the rubric that we used to assess a library assignment for English 22 and 100 called the Research Challenge. And for the assignment, students needed to start by generating some possible keywords they could use when researching their topic. And then they would find a certain number of books and articles, and then evaluate those sources using the CRAP test, and finally create an annotated bibliography of those sources. And you'll see in the second and third rows under SLO 1, our students were marked strong if they found a book in our library catalog, and strong if they found the required number of articles. So yeah, it was pretty simplistic. Once the framework came out in 2015, it took us a few years to actually understand and revise our student learning outcomes. What we ended up with is sort of based on our old standards. We still decided to have these larger SLOs and smaller objectives that align with each SLO, but we also reflected on what we've been seeing in our students that were lacking. So instead of whether students could find a book in our catalog, what we really wanted to see is if students could persist in their searching until they found what they really needed. And instead of just finding sources for their papers that agree with their own opinion, they should actually first understand the larger conversation about a topic and be aware of their own biases and worldview. We aligned each objective with one or more of the frames, and we added that notation in brackets, as you can see highlighted in yellow right now. If we look at the overall mapping of the objectives, you'll notice that we really like research as inquiry, authority is constructed and contextual, and information has value. We don't really have anything mapped to information creation as process right now, but hopefully we'll add that in the future when we revise our outcomes. Here are the objectives tied to the most relevant framework knowledge practices and dispositions. This is part 1 of our SLOs from 1A to 2C. Now I'll pause for just a second because there's so much text. And here's part 2. For 4A and 4B, summarize extended passages, identify the claim, thesis, or hypothesis of a work. We were inspired by the results of the citation project, which was actually, this was a study about how students use sources. All right, and now Joy Ohlers will talk about 4 examples.
Okay, while we continue to use variations on the CRAP test, as it provides a quick evaluation tool for our developmental writing classes, we wanted to explore additional ways for students to assess information. So in the first example, we wanted students to fact-check information they see in their everyday social media posts. And to break down, we wanted students, 1, to dig deeper to see where the source of the information is really coming from. Where are these bloggers and writers getting their facts or research? 2, to recognize that when information is repackaged or made more attractive to read. The emphasis may change or important evidence omitted. And 3, to recognize that when information is repackaged and made more attractive to read, the emphasis, important evidence is omitted. I did miss a slide, I just realized that. Hopefully the next time they see a sensationalized post, they will stop the fact check. Okay, so in this Site 100 assignment, students choose from a list of site-related pop articles. Their challenge is to identify the research mentioned in the article, and then based on the clues provided in the articles, students track down the original scientific study. This is an indirect way for students to try library databases or Google Scholar. Finally, students are asked if they discover any important information that was omitted or treated differently from the pop article versus the scientific study. So in this slide here, you see students like library assignments that are based on attractive looking or popular sounding titles that they identify with. So we choose articles that emotionally charge or challenge their biases, or articles that focus on common urban myths so that students learn to use evidence to question claims. We routinely update our choice of pop articles to keep up with our students' interests or trends. In fact, if you use the link in our chapter to this assignment, the themes of the assigned articles have changed. We hope that this experience helps students see that fact-checking and tracking down the original study can provide a more complete picture. Even if students don't always verify the research mentioned in their media posts, after this exercise, at least they will know how to use library databases to fact-check if they suspect what they read is too good to be true.
And for our second example, we wanted to capture what Joyce was talking about in terms of students persisting in their research. Before, the task was pretty simple for students to find a book in Hawaii Voyager. But we wanted to see if they could persist in finding a book specific to their needs and their assignments. And so we came up with a way to capture that. And we did a pilot observational study, and we actually had our student workers who volunteered in exchange for work hours, and we recorded their audio on Zoom with a screen capture, and students talked through their research process for an hour. Some background on the students, there was recent high school graduates who've never had information literacy classes, also mature students who completed many research papers, even an undecided major, STEM major, recent four-year college transferee, and students who graduated from both public and private high schools. So kind of a mix there. So what we did was we provided students with our a mock assignment sheet and a draft outline for their English 100 research project. And we asked them whether or not coffee was good or bad for your health. And we asked them to find 2 credible sources and explain their choices. So as they walked through the process. And this was specifically addressing the student learning outcome 1B, which was, we wanted to see if they would modify their search terms. And so the findings of our study, there was a lot of findings, but kind of three of the important ones we wanted to highlight was that students did not persist with our library databases. In fact, they kind of gave up quite easily. One student gave up, I think, after 5 seconds. In the end, none of our students used library resources, library databases as a resource. And so we did find that the second finding in connection with the first one is that students trusted Google both as a resource and for its algorithms. And that's because students didn't go past the first 5 search results. We did find that students modified their search terms as their perspective changed. So the good thing is The students did meet our benchmark. It was a 75% met the benchmark for this SLO. However, the drawback was that many students did choose blogs or leisure articles, not research-based articles. And as Joy had mentioned, in the packaging of information and social media, that's kind of what students focused on. They tended to focus on the look of a website rather than the content. A third finding that was particularly important to us was that one student actually picked up new vocabulary as they were reading through the articles. And because we were capturing their audio while they were talking out loud, we could hear the student reflecting, and they brought in their prior knowledge, as well as they talked about myths and misconceptions with coffee. And so we could see them changing their strategy as they went along, and even adding extra terms like health or myth. One thing that was particularly interesting about this student is that they said, I think that for a research paper, you need counter arguments. So I want to address the opposite opinions. So that was interesting to see that that student knew that part.
Yeah, I am muted. Before we move to the framework, much of our instruction was based on the stage teaching method. We will provide a database demonstration and then students complete a worksheet during our one-shot session. Well, students do really well on these worksheets. They found a book from our catalog, an article from an EBSCO database, but at the end of the semester, instructors still complained that their students were using bad websites. After adopting the framework, we created a group activity for students to explore a set of websites, and students then shared with the class what they look for when evaluating websites. We also changed the timing of our assessments. We started early in the semester, not with library databases, but with what students use every day, websites. They work in groups to discuss what they look for in a website, what criteria to apply, and based on this, assess whether their assigned website is suitable for their paper or if they're likely to use this type of website. As a result of shifting to the framework, we move from one-shot assessment to measuring the longer-term impact when students have to implement what they learn in their final term paper. The first activity near the start of the semester provided students with the tools to think critically about websites that they will use throughout the semester. And just before the students start on their term paper, we provide an annotated bibliography activity. Students build on the evaluation skills that they develop from the website activity in week 3, as they select articles from a range of library resources and from the open web for their annotated bibliographies. And finally, we assess their term paper, looking at their choice of sources and whether students use these sources in a deep or superficial manner. Instead of librarians telling students what makes a good website, we let the student groups explore and discuss the attractiveness, ambiguities, hidden agendas, strengths, and suitabilities of 5 websites. And here are just some examples. The first one, starting from the top left side, is it's a fake news site. It always makes a student laugh when they discover that they've been had. It serves to remind students to scrutinize evidence in context. The second one is a highly technical paper for a beginning English composition paper. Students think librarians want to hear the correct answer, so they say that this is a serious paper, so it must be good for their term paper. But when asked what the article is about or how might it help their paper, they usually change their mind. It takes a critical student to say that although it looks like a serious research article, it isn't useful or relevant for his or her paper. And the third one is a sponsored content article published in The Atlantic. The content is beautifully laid out, and often students are blissfully unaware of the hidden agenda of sponsored article. And the last one on the right, the Dakota Access Pipeline, the facts. The facts as provided by the pipeline developer. This website hopefully prompts students to seek diverse worldviews and sources and to examine and be aware of their own political and economic biases and worldviews. By letting students discuss and form their own conclusions, we feel that students learn better and are more engaged compared to librarians telling them what makes a good website.
All right, and earlier when I talked about SLOs, I mentioned that it took us a few years to switch from the standards to the framework. Our focus for library instruction at the time was just on finding, evaluating, and citing information. And we thought that it was just so difficult to address the framework in our instruction that it would be easier to just create an entire new course. So that's what we did in 2016. We created a 3-credit course, IS 297P, Information Power and the Internet. And on the right, we have our SLOs. They're inspired by the framework. Each week, we cover different topics related to information and the internet. For example, crowdsourcing, data brokers, the digital divide, and so on. The major project for the course was the action project, where students would choose a topic from the course that they were most interested in. They would do a deeper dive to learn more about the problem. They would come up with a plan to address that problem, then execute their plan, reflect on their impact in learning, and finally share their project with the rest of the class. And at the end of the semester, they needed to complete an exit essay. This is a reflection paper that addresses each of the course SLOs. And this is what we use later for assessment of SLO achievement. We found that while it does take so much longer to assess and read essays compared to looking at simple checklists or assessing with multiple choice tests, reflection essays give us so much richer data and a deeper understanding of student attitudes and learning. And that is it from us today. Thank you so much for listening to our journey at Kapi'olani Community College. And we'll take questions at the end of today's session.
Okay, so I see a lot of questions in the chat. I just want to address like the first one, are we using lateral reading? Yes, actually, we also have a website. Maybe I could show you.
Well, actually, do we have time? Do we want to pass on?
Right, we'll pass on, sorry.
And maybe at the end of
we'll do that.
The next presentation? Okay.
Hey. This presentation is going to come from Emily Bush, Heidi Blaisdell, and Michael Higgins from Nashville State Community College. And they are co-authors of Making Research Meaningful, Librarian Interventions in First-Year Research, which was in the Community College Library Reference and Instruction book.
Okay, thank you to everyone for joining us today. Our presentation is Making Research Meaningful, Librarian Interventions in First-Year Research, which is over research that we did back in fall 2019. We did a course redesign. The course redesign was funded through a Tennessee Board of Regents course revitalization grant. We'll take you through the course redesign and then we'd be happy to answer questions at the end. And so I'm Emily, I'm the instruction librarian at Nashville State Community College in Nashville, Tennessee. Heidi and Mike are both English instructors in our English department here at Nashville State. In my role, I serve 5 campuses ranging from rural to urban, but our course redesign and research focused on 2 Nashville campuses.
So our pilot was designed to address the inconsistency in the quality and the depth of information literacy skills that students pick up at the secondary level. This is evidenced by many freshman composition students' lack of just necessary critical thinking and just information literacy skills to perform that meaningful and substantive college level research. Furthermore, because the information literacy skills that they get at the secondary level are largely self-taught, many students arrive at the community college with a false sense of competence. This pilot was split between 2 campuses and focused on developing a community in which our students were allowed the opportunity for more collaborative learning while they developed the skills to think critically about their individual research interests. To work toward this, we used a first-year experience to enhance the students' sense of academic and social belonging, as well as repeated librarian interventions both in the classroom and online via an embedded librarian in our LMS, and last, a pilot-specific library research guide. Because information literacy is an essential skill for success in college, students were led through a semester-long research process using SIFT to deepen both their comprehension of the various views of their chosen topic and to strengthen their ability to analyze the claims their sources make in a more intentional and sustained manner. Next, the second half of the semester was devoted to the research paper and applying Carol Dweck's process praise. The goal being was to teach students to connect critical thinking to the research process with less focus on the finished product and more focus on information gathering, evaluation, and synthesis.
As you know, librarians often refer to their instruction with first-year comp students as one-shot, 30 to 90 minutes to cover everything a student needs to know to be information literate. In my experience, students typically come away confused and intimidated by the research process, or on the opposite end of the spectrum, overconfident. Our aim was to break down the key components of the research process taken from the ACRL's framework, and using process praise, have students master each skill before moving forward. The frameworks we chose to integrate into the course were research as inquiry, searching as strategic exploration, authority is constructed and contextual, and information has value. Each skill built on the next, culminating with the final research paper. Students pulled research questions from personal narratives, and we emphasized the need for questions to evolve over the research process. We de-emphasized the act of searching by choosing to provide tutorials outside of class and research appointments in lieu of one-shot instruction sessions. For the analysis paper, we provided students with a list of reputable publications. If students were unable to locate relevant articles from those publications, we provided them with articles. I visited classes to share the SIFT method of source evaluation just before the students began source reflection journals. These journals took the place of the traditional annotated bibliography, which led into the research paper.
Usually when students get to the research paper, their instinct is to Google topics. And so they often end up researching and writing about things that they have little investment in. As a result, students see these academic papers as having little to do with their lives. Instead of having students choose a topic once they got to the research paper, students were thinking about their topics all semester, starting with the personal narrative essay. The narrative essay asks students to explore a larger issue, problem, or phenomenon through their own personal experience. Students wrote about experiences such as drug addiction, being adopted, dealing with mental health issues, being a parent. After they wrote the narrative essay, the librarian came in for the first intervention, and using this checklist that you see, led students in a workshop to develop research questions derived from their narrative. Students received feedback on their questions from both librarian and instructor. In this way, students not only learned how to take their own experience and interest and turn it into a researchable issue, but they also learned from reading other students' narrative essays that academic research can absolutely relate to their lives. Forming these research questions was the first step in helping them locate their own stories inside larger research conversations. You can see the impact of that in this student reflection. My experience in the peer review was amazing. I was so worried to share my story because it is so dark, but the feedback made me feel less ashamed and glad I have decided to go back to school. We encouraged students to keep an open mind and understand that as their thinking about their topic evolved, their research questions would too. This is just one example to show the evolution of a topic. The student moved from a personal essay about struggling with separating her identity from her twin sisters, which led to curiosity about other twins and the question, why do twins struggle with their identity? And eventually evolved to the issue, should twins be placed in the same classroom at school? The act of revising their questions throughout the semester reinforced that research asks us increasingly complex or new questions, whose answers in turn develop additional questions.
Typically, the heart of a one-shot is showing how to search the library databases. For this course pilot, I did not physically visit the classes to teach searching. Instead, students were directed to the class LibGuide with tutorials on searching and recommended resources. They were also prompted to contact me or other library staff with questions on locating sources for more in-depth one-on-one assistance. The LibGuide pictured here included modules on each information literacy unit, developing a research question, locating sources, and evaluating sources. It also included a list of 13 recommended publications from reputable websites, as well as a media bias chart to make students more aware of potential bias in their sources. And although we're aware of the pitfalls of media bias charts, we felt it was a useful tool for our students. For the comparison analysis paper, which required students to analyze 2 articles from different viewpoints, students were asked only to draw from the list of reputable sources provided on the LibGuide. The idea being that students wouldn't have the stress of evaluating sources before their final research paper and would learn to recognize the characteristics of high-quality journalism. Students who struggled to find relevant sources were encouraged to make one-on-one appointments with me. This allowed me to tailor instruction to an individual research question, making the instruction more meaningful for everyone. Beginning with this pared down approach to searching decreased the tendency of students to simply surf the internet. One student wrote, "At the beginning of the semester, I looked at research as a chore. I felt like research was boring and contributed little to my paper. Something I've learned is that valuable research can enhance the content and credibility of the argument. In other classes, I will find ways to use research to better my work." In addition, their comparison analysis of these sources allowed students to discover that even reputable publications can contain biased articles. This made them more aware of the importance of considering different perspectives on their issue. Based on their analysis of the 2 articles, students reflected on how their understanding of their chosen issue had evolved. Building on their developing search skills, rather than moving into a completely different topic and new paper, students were asked to build on what they had learned for the next assignment, writing source reflection journals on 5 or more articles related to their topic. For this more in-depth research, students were encouraged to dive deeper into searching and try out using the databases. To aid in the source reflections, I visited the classes to discuss source evaluation with an emphasis on lateral reading. If you're not familiar with lateral reading, it's basically searching to see what others say about a source. Students were encouraged to search laterally to assess the publication's viewpoint. We also discussed using the SIFT method of source evaluation. As students searched and read, they were asked to consider how each source impacted their understanding of the issue and reassess their research question before moving to the next source. We found breaking down the annotated bibliography helped to demystify the source evaluation process, giving students more opportunities to reflect on the use of individual articles to answer a research question. By reflecting on individual sources through journaling, students were able to fit them within the context of their information needs. These reflections also aided students in keeping an open mind about differing perspectives, a concern that was at the forefront of our minds since confirmation bias is usually strong with first-year students. The experience of moving through this process as a class helps students see how underlying personal experience can inform the argumentative positions, both in their own work and in others' writing. So as y'all know from the frameworks, part of the source evaluation process is to develop an awareness of the importance of assessing content with a self-awareness of their own biases and worldview. One student wrote, "I learned about problems other groups of people have to face. Sharing these stories opened my eyes to some injustice in the world I hadn't realized before." As I was reviewing our chapter in preparation for this presentation, that quote really struck me. Over the past weekend, I read an article in The Atlantic, Why the Past 10 Years Have Been Uniquely Stupid by social psychologist Jonathan Haidt. And in it, he wrote, "The most reliable cure for confirmation bias is interaction with people who don't share your beliefs. People who think differently and are willing to speak up if they disagree with you make you smarter, almost as if they are extensions of your own brain." And this is why I feel this part of the research process is so important. Asking students to continually interrogate how their thinking changed on their topic prompted them to think critically about how their research fits within the larger context of their research question, and hopefully made them more empathetic to different viewpoints. This resulted in searches that focused on uncovering a conversation rather than searches that focused on supporting a position.
Throughout this pilot, we worked toward foregrounding metacognition in our students from the beginning of the semester when we had them reflect on their own, quote, thinking as well as on the individual and cultural processes used to structure knowledge, end quote. Yes, students were told, you have a point of view, an opinion, but why did they hold that point of view? What did they think of the point of views that others held, and why? If there was anything stopping them from considering those, what were those reasons? In a research reflection discussion post late in the semester, students repeatedly mentioned fear of writing papers and just doing research in general when they began the course. By the end of the semester, though, many felt much more comfortable both with research and writing, expressing that they'd gained new confidence in those skills. As one student explained, when I first started, I thought I could just take information from different places and make it my own research. To help students move from this foraging approach to a more organized and academically responsible one, we broke down the process by which they selected information that they felt should be quoted directly and information that should be included as indirect quotes. In keeping with the previous student's comment, part of helping move students to that more organized approach was getting them to slow down. For example, we had them highlight passages from their sources in different colors corresponding to direct quotations, paraphrases, and summaries. We then had them do the same thing for direct and indirect quotations in their rough drafts to ensure that unintentional errors like note-taking plagiarism didn't slip through. Next, they submitted sample signal phrases, parenthetical citations, and corresponding bibliographic entries for their sources. Quote, as we learned the proper way to do a research paper, another student wrote, and how to cite a source correctly, my writing has become stronger, and also I had more confidence in doing a research paper. Where this pilot succeeded was in getting students not only to be more self-aware of their invention and revision strategies, but also in helping them to realize the academic writing process requires careful, consistent, and considerate recognition of their sources' intellectual labor.
First year underprepared students have a greater tendency to produce superficial or cookie cutter arguments. Our new model's extended research process and emphasis on information literacy produce more nuanced and complex arguments in the research paper than previous semesters. Enrollee success, course retention, and completer success improved across all sections of the pilot course. Most notably, the pilot sections on the Nashville campus showed a 7.9% increase in enrollee success overall, and an 11.2% increase in enrollee success of first-generation students when matched against other in-person sections at the Nashville campus. At Nashville State, a large percentage of our students test below college level writing, and so are co-enrolled in a writing support class. Enrollee success for students in our sections who are also co-enrolled in writing support was 5.5% higher than other co-enrolled Composition 1 students. This represents a notable impact on underprepared students. Based on our experience with this pilot, first-year students benefit when they, 1, create research questions with personal meaning for greater investment in their topics. 2, receive frequent process praise from their instructor and librarian to encourage critical thinking. And 3, develop their research process over the course of an entire semester. In other words, by basing their research on their personal experiences and getting the support along the way, students learned how research can be connected to their own lives, both in the classroom and beyond. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Erin Nevius from ACRL. I want to thank all of our presenters today for that incredibly informative presentation. And we're going to do the Q&A portion now. So feel free to keep asking questions in the chat. And I'd like to start off by inviting Joy to talk about lateral reading.
Right. So we actually have this series of videos that we adopt from Control F. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Control F. It's a Canadian and University of Washington consortium that they do. I'm going to put the URL for our, oh, someone said they love Control F. Yeah. So we show those videos and then we have like a discussion, and then there are also quizzes at the end of the video. So if you go to the link that I just put, you will see that that's how we also ask students to, you know, let's look at what other people are saying about this website or this publisher, and let's look and of course their favorite is the just add Wikipedia to check, and that's so easy for most students to just get more information about a website, a source evaluation. And the second question I see is, are we sharing the rubrics? I think in our chapter, we did show 2 rubrics. If anyone else wants the rest of the rubrics, we are always happy to shoot it to you.
That is great. Thank you, Joy. And there's one more question for you, Joyce and Erica, which is, what types of students signed up for the course, and did it fill any requirements for them?
Did it fill, so this was a 200 level course, 297p. So the requirements for them were to have passed English 100 with a C or better, or ESL 100. We had small class sizes. I'm sorry, let's see. We did have some issues with students not really being, what's the word? They're kind of not really understanding, like, why do I have to care about my data footprint and stuff like that? But hopefully we planted seeds for them to, you know, like think about and hopefully realize that, you know, what we were talking about was important in the future. Did it fill any requirements for students? We also had, we attached a WI, a writing intensive designation to this course. So at our campus, I think students need to take, I forget how many, was it 3 writing intensive courses? And if they were to transfer over to a 4-year college, they need a total of 5. So it does fill that requirement. That was kind of the only requirement it filled. And so that's why we did have a hard time filling this class. Our campus also has a declining enrollment, so even more so, a little kind of tough for this course.
But I think the lesson we learned about why it didn't fail is that because it was an experimental course, it wasn't in all the academic advisors' list. So students go to the academic advisors to sign up their courses. And if this course is not visible, students didn't know about it. And it didn't meet additional, apart from the WI, it didn't meet like the other hallmarks or the other like DS or, you know, or the other what is the name, Joyce? We call it hallmarks.
Diversification.
Yeah,
process, yeah.
diversification. Yeah. So I think we did learn our lesson there. That we have to rethink that if we were ever to do it again.
Thank you so much. This question is for Emily, Mike, and Heidi. Since students may be familiar with the CRAP method, how do you leverage what they already know into the new framework and these more nuanced conversations?
I can speak to that, and then Heidi and Mike, you can tell me if I'm wrong. In my experience, students are not familiar with the CRAP method, and all of this is new to them. So I guess there's no leveraging to be done since it's all entirely new.
One thing that I like about the SIFT method and integrating students' own experiences is that it emphasizes research as a conversation and all of these things as connected. And so I think that when we had students take one source and say, and ask them to reflect on how this one source changed their thinking throughout the semester, one by one, students could see how their thinking changed with each new source that they read.
And all I would add is that I think SIFT is really good when they are starting out their research process, but as antiquated as CRAP can be in some respects, I think it's also, after they've gone through SIFT, they go through the CRAP sort of steps for the sources that they think pass muster. And I kind of agree with Emily that sadly, many of our students, when I ask them if they've ever heard of CRAP, they have, they think I'm being literal, I think. I don't know. Let's see.
I feel like the idea of evaluating sources is new to most of our students and any method.
Looks like there are a couple other questions about how this collaboration between English professors and librarians was created. There was just a call for course revitalization proposals, and was it your idea, Emily? I think
it was Heidi's.
We were getting research papers that just felt underdeveloped. I was frustrated with the topics that students were coming up with, and how little personal meaning there was for them. And we had worked with Emily before doing these one-shot deals, and we thought, what if students have a more spread out interventions and have a chance to really go deeper with the sources they choose and and the way that they evaluate those sources, but also getting to know Emily and the library staff so they can go and ask them questions when they had them.
And do we plan to expand this model? Last semester, I did another grant pilot for an OER course for Composition 2 that I basically, is like a semester long sort of research topic broken down in many of the same ways. We are in the process of, I think, converting most classes to 7-week courses. So that's kind of taken most people's bandwidth, but I would like this to get integrated into those reimagined courses, if at all possible.
Yeah, because this happened in fall 2019, and so we didn't really get an opportunity to try again.
Yeah, something got in the way.
Yeah.
Emily Evangeline asks, has this experience changed how you approach traditional one-shot visits for other classes?
Yeah, in some ways it has, because that's still most of what I do is one-shots. I've started, I think, being more pragmatic in my instruction and approaching it with what do students need to know to be successful on a particular assignment, rather than trying to cover everything that a librarian wants to cover in 30 minutes. So yeah, I think it's changed it in some ways.
And to Kate's question, instructors, are you talking this collaboration up at faculty meetings? Yes. We have shared Emily's LibGuide with our colleagues, and I know of some of our colleagues that use that. I know that she has also been asked by other English professors to customize that to their classes and customize some of the workshops. However, this was a grant project, and so we had the support for Emily to do these several days in our classes, and we have 5 campuses where it's not always possible to have that many different interventions. However, as an embedded librarian, Emily has been, and maybe you could speak to this too, but we do include her in many of our English classes as an embedded librarian, where students can send her an email to ask her questions about sources and research.
And I would add, at 2, we're having a course leaders meeting to discuss further developing and expanding these information literacy modules, so that all faculty, full-time and adjunct, can have access to those. So.
Yeah, doing something like this across the board and Comp 1s, as Heidi mentioned, isn't really possible because we're a small staff and we have 5 campuses, but we're looking at ways to incorporate more information literacy into courses.
This is great. Thank you so much. And I believe this question is for Joy, Erica, and Joyce. Are the boxes for your LibGuides via the community, and is it possible to copy and repurpose them?
You mean in our LibGuides? Yeah, I mean, totally. You can use whatever content is on any of our LibGuide. It's like free for all. Does that answer the question? I'm not quite sure which LibGuide in particular you're referring to, but definitely feel free to. I mean, they're just resources we found that works with our student, and hopefully it'll work with yours.
Great, thank you. So last call, we have a little bit more time for questions if anyone has any last things they want to ask. And I'd also like to invite the presenters. If there's anything you'd like to say to wrap up, please feel free.